Let's get into this now with Corey Bernardi, of course, my colleague here at Sky News, and Roshena Campbell, who is part of the Melbourne City Council. Both join us now to talk about this and a whole lot more. Lovely to see you. Corey, there's a few different themes in my opening tonight, but there's one thing that remains definite, right? Supposedly the centre-left cares about the poorest amongst us. Supposedly the centre-left cares about those that are forgotten. But in order to make rich people feel better in teal seats or highly educated people feel better on Twitter, we chase an energy system that's going to make poorer people poorer. We then have a scenario where, again, half the country has chronic illnesses, of which the biggest swath of them seems to be mental, but they may well about to be pushed out of healthcare that you don't have to wait 2 years for because you're private. And then we turn around and say, well, wasn't it wonderful that we saved everyone's life due to COVID, but people with those chronic diseases who should have had elective surgery didn't get it, and we're at a 10-year freaking low, yet we re-elect these people.
Paul, I share your frustration. I spent a decade or more in Parliament trying to educate people about socialism doesn't work, the soothing words don't work, you've got to confront reality. And our system has been built upon a rising tide should lift all boats. You help those that are truly in need, you give them the safety net, but you don't make the rich poorer in order to match those who are the least fortunate in our class. What we need to be doing is to be talking about some realities here. We need to pursue the greatest competitive economic advantage that Australia has ever had, that is cheap and reliable, fossil fuel funded electricity networks. We had people that were working all the time rather than the 50% plus now that are actually getting more in benefits than they pay in taxes for those who do work. We had a universal healthcare system, which was really pioneering in the world, and it seemed to work because most people didn't abuse it. Now, you've got a whole bunch of people who are using it to opt out of the system. Oh, I need a sickie. Can you write me a script for 2 weeks off of work, or I'm feigning some illness? It's just extraordinary. The socialist state is collapsing, and you might say that's alarmist, Paul, but we have been pursuing this cradle-to-grave welfare, this cradle-to-grave sort of nursery that government will look after you and take care of you, and it won't, because government is full of people who tell lies. They're happy to spend other people's money until there's none left, and right now, there's none left, Paul.
Again, right, I understand the politics and I understand how they're all going to be sticking their middle fingers up and their tongues out at us. The Triple O system doesn't work in Victoria. Re-elect the government. The 10-year lows for elective surgery, well, half the population has chronic diseases. We re-elect these damn people. Now, Roshena, again, at the other end of actual data here, Steggall's chicken, okay, it's the Pons Institute, it's a press release, but still, they were able to find a clinical psychologist who suggested that our definition of family has changed, and that's why the people who might be around the dinner table this Christmas may change. Do you believe any of that, or have I just fallen for a press release?
If it's true, it is the saddest story I think I've read this Christmas, Paul.
Good.
If nothing else, over the last couple of years, haven't we learnt how much we miss being with family? When we were deprived of the opportunity here in Victoria for months on end of being able to see family face to face, we've now got the chance of a normal Christmas and people want to spend it with their work colleagues. I mean, that just goes to the theory that we've got some serious mental health issues after these years of lockdowns and pandemic restrictions.
You're saying you don't want to spend Christmas lunch with Nicholas Rees?
Look, I love my work colleagues as much as the next person, but when it comes to Christmas, it's about family. And do you know who I think really misses out if we don't do that? It's our kids.
Yep.
It's their chance to build memories with their grandparents, with their cousins. If you're not going to drive an hour to give them the chance to do that, I think you're selling your family short.
Now, again, Corey, I understand how there's a very easy little thread here that falls apart in terms of who did this study. But the idea that a clinical psychologist turns out there and says, oh, the definition of family has changed. Now, I'm not going back to slippery slope discussions of a few years ago, but again, it speaks very fundamentally. If the idea of family, and we know that there's a lot of groups around the world that want to redefine what that is, there's a lot of groups that actively don't support things like the nuclear family, that tips into this idea about family changing as an idea. Now, I don't mind that society changes, but how the hell can you redefine what family is?
Oh, it's a really good question, and I don't often get a chance to remind people of Paul Keating's mistakes, but he did say that two blokes and a cocker spaniel are not a family. He's wrong. He's absolutely wrong, because in the new world, that's what it is. And yet, historically, it has always been, as Roshena said, about children, about getting them together, to raising and nurturing them. And we know that there's lots of families that are doing that. And that, to me, is the beauty of it. The world is redefining traditional institutions. It's redefining words, sometimes on a whim. We've seen that with some of the online dictionaries and complaints from US congresswomen about sexual attraction or words of that effect. It's now called demeaning. Everything is upside down, and what we thought was entirely normal and not worth challenging and was part of the fabric of society is now somehow really radical and alien. And that's why I wrote this book called The Conservative Revolution in 2014, Paul. And it was basically along the lines, things have got so bad that the radicals, the leftists, the people who wanted this major change are now the norm. And the conservatives, the people who wanted to stick with the tried and tested and proven and build upon our ancestral history, are the radicals and the revolutionaries. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I didn't think it would back in 2014, but by crikey, it's now everything that we've taught is untaught and apparently was wrong and is racist and sexist and whatever else.
Well, if there's copies of it left, and I'm sure half your garage might be full of them, CoreyBernardi.com, mention my name, pay full price. Now, Roshena, talking about how the left take control of things, Yarra City Council, dominated by Greens, they're bad when it comes to money. They're bad when it comes to community consultation. Remember, at one point in time, they decided to put up the Great Wall of Yarra to physically keep away members of the public from going anywhere near the council to ask them questions. Well, we learned today that they have voted to have fewer public meetings next year. Now, that may well be because they've run out of things to ban, but this is the far left. They have new ways to move motions every day. The suggestion is they're doing it so that they don't have to front the people as regularly as they should. A little insight into a future lefty enclave that may well be spreading across the country, comes from Yarra and ends up on the other side of the country. What do you think?
Oh, I think this is absolutely appalling. Talk about lack of transparency, lack of good governance. I mean, you've got people who are, in the case of the mayor, on a salary of over $100,000. If they're only going to front up to ratepayers once a month, that's not good enough. And I've had the misfortune of living in Yarra for part of my life, and I can tell you, the biggest problem in Yarra, they just have forgotten about the basics. Things like roads, rates and rubbish. The rubbish doesn't even get collected every week anymore. So I can understand why they don't want to have to front up to those angry ratepayers, why they don't want to explain to them why they welcomed with open arms a safe injecting room in the city of Yarra. But quite frankly, if you're going to make decisions that destroy communities, the least you can do is be accountable and hold regular meetings.
But also part of this too, which is that we've largely avoided the red city, blue city thing and all the rest of it that happens in the United States. But Corey, we're going to start to see now, once the Greens get a foothold in places like this, public services start to go backwards, but they say all the right things and, we've got to vote for the tribe every single time, right? We are going to get there sooner rather than later when people constantly vote against the purpose of the level of government that they are voting for because it is their tribe, right?
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I was in Melbourne on Monday and Tuesday, Paul, and a whole bunch of people there are now talking openly about moving to enclaves such as Noosa or to Surfers Paradise. We know that it's still a Labor state up there, but it's nothing like what it is in Melbourne. They're saying business is too hard to do. A restaurateur down there was fantastic, but he was just saying he had to pay $60 an hour to get people to wash dishes in his restaurant. That's just extraordinary. How can you do that and be in business? And it's all because Dan Andrews has made things so very, very hard. And the red state, blue state thing like in America, I think it's going to happen here. I think people are going to, with wealth and means, are going to move to communities where they are respected, they're treated well, and maybe the climate plays a part in it as well. But and that's what, if I can segue here, if you go back, there's a history of this guy, it's called the Curley effect. He wanted to cling to political power in Boston, and he didn't care what the price. And so what he did, he ran down the services so that all the wealthy, all the business people left, and you only had people who were responsible to the state, or the state was responsible for their welfare, but they all voted for the benevolent dictator who was there, Mr. Curley. He kept power for decades, Paul.
No, correct. And I love, dare you offer criticism of the dear leader? It ain't North Korea. We'll continue to do it because of the stupid examples that we often see and cite, and the idea that people suffer as a result of these decisions. Well, we'll continue to do so because it's right to do so. Finally here, New South Wales looks like they're moving towards some sort of a change in the way poker machines work. Now, this doesn't surprise you. I've told you many a time I don't mind a slap. If I get the opportunity to go and do so, particularly Seagulls, Twin Towns, I'm in, right? All in. But the suggestion is that they need to introduce a pre-commitment card to make sure that problem gamblers, at the very least, have to walk away from a machine, look somebody in the eye before recharging the card. Now, clubs don't like it. Labor Party's a little lukewarm on it, but Perrottet, trying to take a couple of votes back from the Teals, is getting the full love of the Sydney Morning Herald on this, which means they'll count it as a win, and it'll probably happen. As for public opinion, well, surprise, surprise, most people don't play poker machines, so they love the idea. 62% of people support a cashless gaming card, 16% opposed, 23% of people said, this question's not about climate change. Could you please get back to climate change questions, please? Roshena, again, I don't know whether you like a slap, don't like a slap, all the rest of it here, but the concept of a pre-commitment card for a poker machine, it feels like it's the way it's going to go. Do you think it's what should happen?
Look, the reality is a lot of people can gamble in a very responsible way. And for people like that, we don't need to intervene. In fact, it should be hands off. People like you, Paul, I trust you to get to the pokies and leave when it's time to go.
Thank you.
But the reality is there are problem gamblers out there, and we know gambling is one of those addictions that can destroy individuals and destroy their families. So I'm open to a voluntary system. If people think that's what they need to regulate their habit and break a habit that can be very destructive, let's give it a go. But I think the touch has to be very light because the vast majority of people, they're able to control themselves.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. All right, Corey, we'll see you again very soon. Looking forward to the, look at Corey, look at that. Of course, Corey's promised to do a shirtless appearance at the Christmas party for Sky News. We'll send the photos. Of course, we're streaming it live for the conversation that we'll be having in and around The Voice. It'll be a fun few hours. Thank you, Corey. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Roshena. Always lovely to see you and see you again very soon.